Hi, this is kind of an unexpected video, but with current events as they are, I feel like I need to at least throw myself out there before it's too late. We have a tiny audience here already, but if nothing else, this may be at least a way to get a couple of you to pay attention to a broader issue at large. So I'm letting you know right now, this video is not going to be as tightly edited as my other content. I've often heard the joke about my videos being second monitor content, which I find kind of funny. I use second monitor content all the time. Well, this is probably going to be my most second monitor-y video yet. Just a heads up. I'll also not be monetizing this video at all, for whatever that's worth. But now let's get down to the topic at hand. Games are dying. Actually, it's worse than that. They are being killed. Every month of every year, games are constantly being shut down by publishers with no recourse given at all to the people who bought those games. You purchase a game, and one day you can play it, then the next, it's gone from your library. This is due to a pesky trend publishers and developers have adopted, where games are permanently shackled to a company-ran central server, a server that you are required to connect to just to play your game in any capacity. Have you ever bought a game? Any game. Single player, multiplayer, MMO, any genre too. And notice that when you launch the game, you're forced to log in and connect to some online server before you can even play it? Well, that game in your hands right now is technically on life support. You may think you should have ownership over it, but the publisher doesn't think so. After an arbitrary number of years, or in some cases months, maybe even weeks, that developer or publisher can decide to pull support from that game for any reason. And when they shut those servers down, your game is now unplayable with zero recourse to the buyer. That's a game that you owned that has now been killed. This is a practice that has become dangerously commonplace nowadays, with games of all genres and categories being shackled to either an online DRM service or being forced to connect to a central server. They both do the same thing. They kill your game once they're shut down. And when I say all kinds of games, I mean all kinds of games. Single player games that could work offline, lobby-based multiplayer games that should work with private servers, co-op games that could work peer-to-peer, all of them tied to a central server and then shut down with no ability by the consumer, by people who bought the game, to restore it to any working state. Just gone. In fact, I'll make a point in this video. You may notice that I have some gameplay playing in the background, as many video editors tend to do. It's just something for you guys to look at, so you don't have to focus on my droning voice. However, every game you will see in this video is a game that is always online, with no offline mode. Or in some cases, there is an offline mode, but you have to connect to the online DRM frequently for it to be accessible. These are all games that once they lose support, they'll be unplayable in any capacity. Well, nearly all of them. We'll get into that secret game later in the video. Sadly, I think most gamers have just become jaded to this issue. Straight up, there are people under a certain age who just kind of accept it, and they think it's just normal. Yeah, it's totally normal for any game that I used to own and play and maybe enjoy in some capacity, for that game to just be ripped out of my hands and thrown into a meat grinder. Perfectly normal. In fact, I know a non-zero number of people watching this video right now just think this is reality. They may even think that just because a game has online multiplayer, or that it's an MMO, or that it requires online DRM, that, yeah, it just should die at an arbitrary point in time. There's no stopping that. That fun little game you played years ago is a lost cause, and we shouldn't even care about it. I'm here to tell you that no, this is not a thing you should tolerate. And you shouldn't have to worry about buying a game only for that game to be deleted from existence any number of years later. Sure, games lose support all the time. Companies can walk away, move on to the next title, leave it be. They can do whatever they want with it. However, games can exist without developer supervision, quite easily in fact. Games can run offline. Players can run private servers. In some cases, communities can revive entire MMOs just because the developers were smart enough to give away their source code or provide fans with their server code. For much of gaming history, this is how video games used to be. This is how online games used to be. There were plenty of online games, going back even to the 90s, that are still playable today. Not because the publishers are still running those games, but because players are able to run it themselves. However, when we jump to 2025, this practice of goodwill seems lost on most publishers, who are now happy to just force a game to connect to their server and nothing else. No offline mode, no private servers, no way for players to host their own game. And sure, you can sit around and say, oh, I don't need private servers, I don't need to host my own MMO lobby, I'm happy to just play on those company servers. But when that game loses enough players, that publisher will pull the plug. And when that happens, the player has zero recourse in that game they have already spent money on, and the publishers skip town. Games back in the day used to have end-of-life plans. Developers knew going into it that the game should still be able to run, even once they've ended support and they're long gone. So developers would often provide tools to allow users to play those games long after those studios have shut down. But that sadly really isn't the case anymore. Online games now are entirely ran through company servers. Very few games even offer community servers. And with how stingy publishers behave in regards to maintaining their control over the player economy, such as through online shops or skins, the idea of allowing players to host their own unmoderated private servers, as was the norm 20 years ago, is now seen as a direct threat and is squashed at any opportunity they get. These companies don't want you to have lifeboats. They want you and your money to go down with the ship when it inevitably sinks. And do not mistake my phrasing. It will sink. If that online game you're playing right now isn't raking in boatloads of money for the publisher every single quarter, then I'm sorry, it has its days numbered. The longest running online live service games that are still being kept alive by their publishers account for a tiny percentage of all games as a whole. For every online game still alive today, there is an Arlington cemetery full of games that had their lights snuffed out years ago. Think about online games that you like but might not be super popular. The games that maybe flew a bit under the radar and only boast a small or perhaps even modest player base. I'll make a bet right now, a lot of you listening had a game pop into your head just then. There's a game you're thinking of right now, I know you are, a game that is being kept alive by the developers despite its low player base. Guess what? That game that you're thinking of, if it has no end-of-life protections, it's gonna die. It just will. This is where the Stop Killing Games initiative steps in. Stop this practice and get the law to look into game companies selling their products to consumers and then deactivating them an undetermined amount of time after purchase. In effect, it's just a roundabout way of planned obsolescence, forcing buyers to give up the game they've already bought and buy the brand new one. This initiative has been going for a year, but it really picked up steam as of late. A lot of people are finding out about this initiative pretty recently, at least within the last few weeks. But me personally, I've been following it for a decade at this point, and it all comes down to the person who created it. Ross Scott, aka Accursed Farms on YouTube. This initiative is only about a year old, but anyone who's been following Ross knows that this has basically been his personal crusade for at least 10 years, probably longer. And for those who don't recognize him, you may recognize his voice from Freeman's Mind.
That could be me right now, a toxic human french fry. But no, my simian skills saw me safely.
Ross has spent the last decade and a half covering just games. Usually older or obscure games, but at least interesting games. This is part of his series, Ross's Game Dungeon. I've made no effort in hiding my love of the Game Dungeon, and I'm sure plenty of you are all aware of how influential Ross was on me as a YouTuber. I hold a ton of respect for him, and I find his views on games to be just really refreshing. The way he sees them as a medium and an art form, it's just, I don't know, he sees them in a different light than most people do. At least I think he does. There's a lot of appreciation for the artistic talent that goes into building these digital worlds. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. If you haven't already, go marathon through his Game Dungeon series. A lot of it has also involved him digging up and practically restoring forgotten games to a playable state. Multiple times, he's either made a game playable on modern hardware or just straight up rescued games from becoming lost media. There are not many YouTubers who can say the same. Throughout his series, he began to touch on a very important topic, that being games as a service, and more importantly, games being sold for a price, any price, and then being shut down years later when the studio inevitably goes under or when the publisher sees no value in keeping the game up and running. This is the start of his dead game arc. It is a very distressing issue, mostly to people like us who love to revisit old games. We like to go back and play games years and years after release. Maybe we didn't have a chance to play the game at the time, but now we just want to go back and check it out years, maybe decades later. As Ross's game dungeon progressed, it became a recurring theme, because some of the games that he would revisit were titles that were literally unplayable and had been killed off. He's been fighting against the destruction of video games for over practically a decade at this point. The reason I bring all this up is detractors of the initiative, of which there are surprisingly many, not too many, but they're there. They always go for baseless ad hominem attacks against them. We'll get to that, don't worry. I need you people to understand this isn't a brand new movement that has just sprung up out of nowhere. This has been a long, arduous march that started nearly 10 years ago, all the way back to Ross's Battleforge video back in 2015. Since then, he's steadily been ramping up his efforts, from making his stance on the issue well known, making a new series on games being shut down, and then making long, detailed legal breakdowns, questioning the legality of these always online live service games being sold as goods. This is all culminated to where we are now, with him finally starting and pushing forward movements globally to force lawmakers into at least looking into this issue. Because as it is now, it's a gray area as far as the law is concerned, in most parts of the world. In some places, specifically the US, it's kind of a lost cause. It's been a year since the movement started, and a lot of these initiatives have whittled down to a select few, with the biggest one by far being the EU petition, which closes by the end of this month. If you're an EU citizen, you have till July 31st to sign this. It was a petition that requires 1 million signatures, and luckily, we managed to get through the threshold, just barely before it could close by the end of July. Of course, there are a lot of concerns that the signatures might not be valid. So, as always, sign it if you haven't already. Do not worry about what that number says. If you haven't signed it and you're an EU citizen, go sign it right now. As for me, well, I'm just here to make this video to at least educate some people who managed to slip through the cracks. Yeah, this video is not like the rest of my content. It's more of just me helping get the message out there. I do not make these types of videos either, especially because this is time sensitive, and as you might guess, my channel really isn't about day-to-day issues. I really don't make content like this. But no, this is a pretty important issue, and I want to at least address it. Because this topic, the killing of games, it really has been weighing on me, for the past decade at least. Ross's early videos on this topic had an effect on Teenage Bunker Dweller. Hell, outside of Ross's own influence, there are many games that are lost time that I will never be able to revisit. And sure, we can argue about the quality of these games till the cows come home, but that's besides the point. Games that you have spent money on are being killed, and we're entering an era where people literally have no comprehension of a game existing for more than 5 to 10 years. We are entering a nightmarish period when it comes to game preservation and just media preservation in general. It's tragic what's happening, and I worry that it's breeding a sense of FOMO into consumers. Come and get your game quick. It's going to be lost forever soon. And I'll throw this out there. Yeah, this applies to bad games too. Buying a product that people generally agree to be bad doesn't change consumer law. And even if a game is bad, why destroy it? Why not have it exist? If nothing else, as an example as for what not to do for a game. Hey, ask any internet reviewer. Bad games are fun to review. I know that from firsthand experience. Most of you wouldn't even be on this channel were it not for some bad games. So that's my stance on it. What is SKG? The topic of Stop Killing Games has exploded in the last couple weeks. And unfortunately, way too many people still seem to not have a proper grasp or understanding of what exactly the initiative is for and what it's trying to do. Not just detractors, I'm talking about people who are championing these petitions, and yet they still seem a little fuzzy on what it's supposed to be. Because the internet has a funny idea of what a game being dead truly means, which is probably where a lot of the detractors are coming from. When you say a game is dead, it can mean anything on the internet. It can mean the game is bad, it can mean the publisher is bad, it can mean there's only a little bit of the player base left, it could mean there's still a good chunk of players left, but it's not at the peak that it used to be. When you go on the internet and you talk about dead games, every single person has a slightly different interpretation. So when we talk about killing games, when we talk about games being dead, we're talking dead. We're talking games that are unplayable, The developer has stopped supporting it. The publisher no longer sells it. The servers are gone. Even if you have the files installed, you cannot play this game anymore. That is what a dead game is. That's what we're talking about. On top of that, people don't really seem to know what the initiative is exactly. So let me spell it out for you, because this is really important. What is Stop Killing Games? It's simple. We want video games that have been sold to and purchased by a customer to remain playable by that customer, even if support ends. We want to make sure that once a publisher stops supporting a game, in whatever capacity that means, that game will still remain playable, and it will require zero connections to the publisher after they shut down services, that either being a central server or online DRM, what have you. And that's it. That's all Stop Killing Games is. Making sure the person who bought the game can still play the game, even if the publisher doesn't want to support the game. Pretty simple. There's no concern over how a company wants to sell their game either. If they want to have the game be always online, they want to sell microtransactions, make it a live service game, that's entirely up to them. A publisher or developer can handle their game however they want, so long as that game is playable to a person who purchases it. So once that support ends, we just want there to be some reasonable recourse for people who still want to play the game that they bought with real money. You know, like any other product. When Gibson filed for bankruptcy in 2018, all Gibson guitars didn't just spontaneously combust and magically stop working. Nor were guitarists unable to tune them and fix them up if issues arose. If a product is good enough, it can and will outlive the company that made it. Games are no exception. Of course, when we talk about making sure a game remains playable, the question arises, what does that mean? What exactly are we asking from developers and publishers? Well, as worded in the EU initiative, we recognize there's a ton of edge cases because games vary dramatically on what might be an attainable solution for an end-of-life plan. There's a lot of ways that publishers can prevent games from dying. This includes, but is definitely not limited to, providing players with an offline mode, making sure an online-only game is patched with offline playability once that server shuts down. In the case of multiplayer games, allowing players to host their own private servers. If private server software isn't available, sometimes releasing the code and documentation to running a game server is all that's needed. These are just a handful. The reason I list these is because these are all real end-of-life plans that plenty of games already use. However, the reason the initiative doesn't include a strict list of acceptable options is, as I said earlier, we understand every single game is unique. The whole point of this initiative is to work with publishers to keep their games playable. If a developer has their own way of ensuring that a game is still playable, even once they shut down servers, that's entirely up to them. Just make sure that we can still play the game, and we're good. You see, another big part of the initiative is to also convince EU lawmakers that what's being asked for isn't unreasonable, and that this is just a consumer initiative to protect consumer rights. Because it is. We don't want to force games to have an offline mode. We don't want to force all games to be open source or to have server software for users. Every game is unique, and we just want playability at the end of the day. If a company has a way to implement it, that's up to them. So that's all Stop Killing Games is. A person who bought a game should still be able to reasonably run it after support has ended. Every word of that sentence is what SKG is, and all it should be. Nothing more, nothing less. Keyword as well, after support has ended. SKG is only concerned with end-of-life plans. So that's what Stop Killing Games is. But as I said earlier, people are confused about it. They still are. So in addendum, I'm going to clarify what Stop Killing Games is not, just so I can hopefully weed out some common misunderstandings. And I mean pretty damn common. I see these crop up all the time, and I really just want to help correct people. I feel bad too because there are people who think the initiative is doing things that is entirely out of its scope. So here we go. Stop Killing Games is not requiring developers to keep support for their games running at the expense of server or maintenance costs. This point has been already debunked many times, yet I still see people on Twitter and in Reddit comments still worried about the idea of us enslaving developers and forcing them to keep an MMO up and running till the end of time. It's hilarious, and it's one of the first points debunked on the official FAQ. Guys, I need to reiterate, the entire Stop Killing Games movement is built on the premise that a publisher and developer we'll stop supporting a game. The entire movement is built on that idea that support for a game will eventually end. It just happens. Companies go out of business, or maybe they just focus on other products. That's what happens in a free market. The entire movement is only concerned with tackling what happens when that inevitable shutdown occurs. After the servers have already had their plugs pulled, what happens then? It's after that point that we want a game to remain playable. In fact, we want games to remain playable without the developers having to lift a finger after support ends. And if a company is completely done with a game, if they're just sick of it, they don't want to touch it anymore, it's costing them too much money to keep up and running, by all means, they should just be able to move on. However, that game just has to remain playable. Otherwise, forcing developers to remain permanently tied to keeping their games alive, we're just pushing the problem further down the road. Because companies don't last forever. At least most companies don't. But yeah, this point gets argued many, many times, and it's just a complete misunderstanding of what we're even asking for. In fact, it's actually the opposite. We do not want games that are permanently connected to those servers. In Warhammer 40k, all of warp travel for the Imperium of Man is kept open thanks to the mind of the Emperor, whose rotting corpse is slowly decaying on the Golden Throne. All of humanity is just continually praying that his mind will last forever and won't fade away. Because when his mind does fade, it will permanently lock off the galaxy from faster than light travel, and the Imperium might be completely destroyed. That's kind of what this argument reminds me of, and it's exactly what we're trying to prevent with SKG. We do not want a publisher to keep the servers running till the end of time, because we know it's unfeasible. It's an impossible solution, and it's one that's never been argued with in the first place. If anything, people worried about developers being forced to maintain a game forever should be on board with SKG, because what we're asking for is for games to have the ability to run without developer intervention. We want a developer to not worry about ending support for a game, because that game will still keep running. We want compartmentalization. If a publisher can't sustain a running game's central servers, we get it. Just let users run it themselves, so you don't have to. This brings up another point about Stop Killing Games, which I've seen a handful of times. And once again, I have to clarify. Stop Killing Games is not about forcing games to be offline. An offline mode is one of the many possible solutions that publishers can and have used in keeping games playable after they've ended support. However, it is not the only solution. Offline modes are an acceptable solution. Those are totally fine. A lot of online games can work offline. However, some games, mainly multiplayer games, might not work feasibly offline. Maybe you have an MMO that doesn't have all of its code client-side, and it requires players to connect to a server. A lot of MMOs have their code split between server-side and client-side. We recognize that trying to combine these two to a single-player offline mode might be a lot of work, and this is why the initiative isn't asking for an offline mode. The only thing the initiative is asking for is that that game can still be reasonably played after support ends. If that involves letting players run their own servers, then yeah, that's an acceptable solution. Let players host their own servers without the company spending a dime. And hey, believe it or not, for a long chunk of gaming history, this is how multiplayer games used to be. This is how online games used to operate. Hey, did you know that the old Unreal tournaments are still playable despite being unsupported by Epic and removed from all of their storefronts? Yeah, because Unreal Tournament was never tied to a central server, and they allowed for private servers. So you can still play your copy of Unreal, and you can play it over the internet. You just need to get a private server up and running, and you're playing Unreal, even though Epic no longer supports it. But outside of small match-based lobby games, an MMORPG might rely on a central server. But with enough documentation and code provided by the developers, it can absolutely be restored thanks to dedicated groups of fans. There is precedent to fans recreating server software by hand just to keep their old MMOs up and running. And honestly, all a developer has to do is release their code and documentation, and the community will just run wild with it. They'll do the work themselves. This isn't theoretical. This has happened many, many times. There are games still playable today because of this, because of a dedicated fan community. Your multiplayer game can and should work, even if a publisher has ended its support. This movement is about protecting all games, not just single-player games that can work offline, but multiplayer games too. Again, look at Unreal. You can still play it if you purchased a copy. It does suck, though, that Epic removed it from its storefronts. However, this leads us to another false claim about SKG. Stop Killing Games has nothing to do with restoring games that have been removed from storefronts. The initiative has nothing to do with intellectual property, nor how a game is sold or distributed. We're not asking for games to be restored on platforms like Steam or GOG. I've seen way too many people making comments like, yeah, I support SKG because my favorite game was delisted on Steam. Oh, sorry, but that's not what Stop Killing Games is about at all. Stop Killing Games is only concerned about a game that you have purchased and are now unable to play due to a publisher ending support. Outside of that, there is no concern for how a publisher wants to sell their game. If they want to take a game off a digital storefront, such as Steam or GOG, and maybe they're unable to sell it due to licensing issues, then yeah, that's entirely up to them. It's the publisher's choice. I've said it multiple times, I'll say it again. Gaming should be a free market, and it should be up to the company selling the game to decide how and where they want to sell it. The only thing SKG is concerned about is making sure that people who have bought a copy of that game can still play it no matter what. If that means the game is still playable after support ends, or if that game is still playable after it's been pulled from that storefront. There are many delisted games from Steam, for example, that are still playable. That's it. That's all SKG is there to protect. This also leads to another misconception, which I do sadly have to clarify, because it does tie into SKG, but it's sadly not what this initiative is aiming to do. Stop Killing Games is not advocating for the complete restoration of games that have already shut down. It's an initiative asking for end-of-life consideration for titles being developed in the future going forward. It's important to say this. We are not asking for retroactive reinstatements of all offline games, or any offline games for that matter. We would love it, don't get me wrong, we would all love some of these old games to be restored. As tragic as it is to say, we understand this is kind of an unfeasible goal. It's unfeasible right now and probably will be for the near future. This movement has been on an uphill battle all the way through. And this idea of restoring all these old games, it really is just a bridge too far. It's something that publishers could easily fight back on, which is why one of the first points about Stop Killing Games is how this is only for games made going forward. Nothing about it is going to be retroactive. So as it is now, Stop Killing Games is only focused on games being made in the future. It's a much more obtainable goal, and it's one that is probably a lot easier to work with publishers on. If this initiative is taken seriously by EU lawmakers, then this would be a good incentive by publishers and developers to build end-of-life plans in with their games from the very start. Games being made will have these features built in from the foundation, so that when those central servers eventually get shut down, those games will still be playable. That's the hope, at least. There's a smaller argument I've seen crop up every now and then, but I still want to address it, because it has to do with the hardware that games are sold for. Stop Killing Games is not about maintaining games' playability on future hardware. If a game is sold on a particular operating system or console, it is only reasonable to expect playability on that particular system. You buy a game on Windows 11. The developer then eventually stops supporting that game. Many, many years down the road, we may be on Windows 14 or 15 or some dumb name like Windows Infinite probably. The question is, will Stop Killing Games force a publisher to keep their game working on those future versions of Windows? Not in the slightest. I bought this game when it had support for Windows 11. There is no expectation for this game to be perfectly playable on other operating systems in the future that aren't Windows 11. This also ties in with consoles as well. A game sold on Xbox should remain playable on the Xbox. We don't ask that it's playable on other platforms at all, just that my copy of that game still works on the hardware that it was sold for. There's plenty of people who think that SKG wants old games constantly resold on newer hardware. That's not the case. If I buy a game for a system or an OS, that game should remain playable on that system or that OS. Nothing more, nothing less. This also brings up another interesting debate that I see pop up all the time, and it is driving me nuts. It's a debate made by people who keep trying to co-opt SKG, and I really feel like they're starting to muddy the waters. It's becoming a case where we really need to address this, because I think some people just don't know any better. Stop Killing Games is not concerned with the debate of digital versus physical. All right, if there's a controversial take in this video, this is going to be it. The digital versus physical debate is worthless. I'll say it again. It doesn't matter if you have a digital copy of a game or a physical copy, because guess what? Both copies of those games are being killed. This debate comes up all the time, and I really don't think you guys are aware of how bad things really are. Having physical games no longer guarantees your ownership of those games, at least according to the publisher. Digital versus physical has been a useless argument for years now, and I'm kind of tired of pretending otherwise, but I'm going to put my foot down here. When it comes to the concept of game ownership, digital and physical are in the exact same boat. Because think about it. First, digital games now can be played offline. Once again, gamers love to ascribe weird definitions to terms, and for a lot of them, digital games just means games that you can play through Steam or Game Pass. Yeah, that is online DRM, but you don't have to play a game through Steam. You do not have to play a game through Game Pass. You can play a game offline on your own computer, far away from any online DRM. It's been GOG's business model for years now. Hell, old PC games are easily playable without any kind of online connection if you still have the original files. So long as those game files are safe on your hard drive, they'll be playable until the end of time. Or at least as long as that hard drive will last. Secondly, physical games aren't safe anymore from DRM. They haven't been for a long time either. Oh yeah, here's my 11-year-old copy of Destiny 1. I'm sure I'll be able to play this game once the servers shut down. Or all of these amazing games. They're all physical. I'm so glad I bought a physical game, you guys. The developer can never take these games away from me. Guys, your discs aren't safe anymore. Gramps, I don't know how else to explain it. You keep touting your physical games like it's going to save you from this, when that really just isn't the case anymore. When these games shut down, and they will shut down, but when they do, it won't matter if your game is on a disc or on a hard drive. Both will be unplayable, and both will be destroyed from your library. This debate is really pointless, and it's just a distraction. So much so that it's kind of creating a bad sense of direction for people. People think the debate on ownership lies with whether or not you can buy a physical copy of a game, but that's not the case. It hasn't been the case for probably 15, God, maybe 20 years at this point. Jesus, who knows? But it's just not helpful anymore. And if anything, it's just creating two sides of a conflict who really shouldn't be fighting each other. In the Second Punic War at the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal fought against a much larger Roman force. However, the Romans were divided between the two consuls at the time, Paulus and Varro, who both were stuck arguing about military strategy. Varro wanted a more aggressive approach. Paulus argued for caution. It was thanks to their infighting that led to a majority of the Roman army getting completely slaughtered by Hannibal. Yeah, don't be like these two knuckleheads. Both sides of the physical versus digital debate need to learn to team up so we can tackle the real threat. Owning your games versus not owning your games. That's what really matters here. This whole digital versus physical bullshit is just a remnant from a long lost era. We are beyond that point anymore. This brings me to my last point, which wraps everything around at the very beginning. Stop Killing Games is not necessarily a protest against live service only games, nor is it a movement set on preventing these games from existing. It's a movement about owning your games. Destroying all online live service games has never been part of the end goal, and as stated earlier, a developer or publisher can do whatever they want with a game, as long as it's being supported. If some developer wants to make an online-only live service game, that's entirely their choice. SKG has no effect on that whatsoever. The only thing that's being asked for is that once support ends, we just want to still be able to play their games. You know, the games that we have already paid money for, instead of shutting games down and making them unplayable, which is what already happens. Stop Killing Games wants the game that you bought to still be playable. If that means patching a game near the end of its lifespan to work offline, then sure, that works. If that involves having an offline mode at the very beginning, then yeah, we'll take that too. Or if it involves letting players be able to run their own private servers, then yeah, that's a solution as well. The reason this initiative often turns into an attack on online-only live service games is usually because these games are the number one culprits for game shutdowns. And so anyone who's a supporter of SKG usually has been burned by these kinds of games. So it's personal for most, if not all of us. But that's something I feel needs clarification. It's not a protest against online-only games. It's not a protest against live service games. It's just an initiative asking for the ability for a person who bought and paid for a game to still be able to play that game, no matter whether or not a developer has ended support for it. Alright, so you now know what SKG is and what it isn't. So let's get back on track here. The EU initiative. Now, the initiative itself was a global one. The Stop Killing Games campaign sought to attack from all angles that they could. Throughout these discussions, you may constantly hear about the game The Crew, the online-only open-world racing game made by Ubisoft that was sold for full price and then was shut down about a year ago. Well, The Crew was an interesting case. Kind of a perfect storm, to be honest, because it was a game that Ross had already made a video about quite a few years ago. Even in the video, he mentioned how this game was eventually going to be shut down because it was online only. And the timing of Ubisoft's announcement that they were shutting down the game happened right as Ross was planning the SKG movement. On top of that, Ubisoft is a French company. They're right in the middle of EU jurisdiction. This was the golden opportunity that had to be jumped on. So Ross and those in the SKG movement first used The Crew as pretty much a springboard to confront this practice, and to at least do so in front of a French court. It was a long step-by-step process too. The case is still ongoing, but it was the spearhead of the movement that would follow. This was the Normandy invasion to liberate Europe. And sadly, countries like the US were kind of a lost cause. Or at least, if SKG was to fight in the US, it would take a lot of time and money, and not a good chance that it would succeed. At least that's how I understand it. However, the EU, as well as a few other countries, mainly the UK, were big, juicy targets. For these countries, petitions were set up to force the hand of lawmakers in the UK, and more importantly, in the EU, to confront the legality of games being shut down as a whole. There's a whole lot more to it. Like, these aren't the only initiatives and petitions ran by SKG, but the EU petition especially remains the last big shot that we have at changing the industry as a whole. If there's a chance, it's going to be the EU petition. The EU making a decision on this petition would be a huge deal because its market is massive. I have occasionally seen some naysayers argue that if the EU passes any regulations, it'll just stop publishers from publishing in the EU. But I don't think people respect just how big of a market the EU is, especially for video games. It's to the point where the costs towards following EU regulation are completely negligible compared to losing this entire market. The EU is a big reason why loot boxes kind of died out in large AAA games. It's also a big reason why planned obsolescence in tech is being fought against. The EU enacting policy can and will have positive aftershocks felt in the US. That's the hope, at least. We will have to hold our breath and see if anything truly happens. But no matter what, it's at least our last good chance to prevent future games from being destroyed. That's what Ross is fighting for, to get EU citizens to sign this EU petition. Now, I highly doubt that anyone who has seen this video, especially up till this point, isn't already aware of SKG. But if you happen to be the one person who hasn't heard of Ross, or hasn't heard of Stop Killing Games, and you also happen to be an EU citizen, I'll include a link down below where you can sign. It's incredibly easy, and it takes less than a minute to fill out. And at this point, don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about how it says we're already at 1 million. Sign it anyways. We need the extra signatures. Of course, we can't really talk about the initiative without acknowledging the bad actor in the room. Originally, this video was very focused on this individual, but as I've written it and rewritten it, I find that he's more just the spark to ignite this conversation. Not as interesting as a conversation himself. Less than a year ago, Pirate Software, aka Thor, aka Jason, became the defining naysayer against the Stop Killing Games movement, for some very questionable reasons. He's had numerous streams and clips talking and ranting about it, with a lot of thinly veiled animosity and snidiness thrown towards Ross, which is really undeserved.
Oh shit, now this is actually really dumb. It's used car salesman garbage. This is shit. It's shit. Not only do I not want to back this, I'm going to actively tell people not to. That is awful. That is a horrible goddamn direction. That's awful, dude. No, eat my entire ass. That the level of stupid that I just had to receive was like sitting on Twitter for 12 hours. This shit sucks. That's a really stupid ass move. That's an incredibly stupid ass move. I think this is ass. This is complete garbage. All of this can eat shit then. I drop the mask entirely. I have no qualms about that. They can eat my entire ass. The whole thing. That sounds stupid as shit.
One of his videos racked up 1 million views, people disparaged the movement, and now it's being argued that he stifled support of a very pro-consumer movement at a time when it really needed that. It lost a lot of momentum at the time, probably thanks to him. Ross himself was very cordial about the whole thing. Many times he asked Jason for a polite conversation, while at the same time, Pirate Software kept dodging him every single step of the way and refused to even acknowledge that he was coming from a good place. Yeah, he called Ross a used car salesman, called him disingenuous. Ross, the guy who has restored games from the dead. Ross, who has been doing this for over a decade. Ross, who has spent all of his time, money, and sanity battling with different legal systems across multiple countries and continents. Disingenuous.
Would you consider reaching out and talking to Ross about it? No. And the reason why is because I found his entire statement over the YouTube incredibly disingenuous.
Yes, this issue which has bothered me since I was a teenager and I've spent 10 years on trying to push back against is me being disingenuous.
Jason kept doubling down on his portrayal of the initiative as well. A portrayal which is unequivocally false. We'll get to that. And sadly, people kind of defended Pirate. This would have been about a year ago, and at the time, it seemed like Jason was infallible. All the while, Ross was being polite to Pirate. He was telling his fans not to start internet fights, and simply tried to keep the movement going without any drama. Well, unfortunately, Pirate's video on the subject matter derailed it, and people kind of moved on from the initiative, thinking that Pirate may have had some good points, and never really hearing Ross's side. For 10 or 11 months, that's where the EU petition sat, with less than half of the required signatures to go anywhere. Well, months went by. Ross kept it up, he kept promoting the SKG initiative, but eventually, it was a month away, and still less than half of the required signatures. So Ross metaphorically threw in the towel. He made a video about giving his honest thoughts about the initiative, how drained he was about it, how no matter what happened, this would be the end of the movement, and he spent quite a bit of time debunking Pirate Software's representation of the movement. Ross kind of summed it up by saying that if the initiative failed, then at least he did all he could, which is already more than anyone could have possibly asked for. Ross put in way more work to save gaming as we know it than probably any single person. I doubt anyone can blame the dude for wanting to take a break. Even in his comments about Pirate Software, Ross was once again very polite. More polite than I or most people probably would be to Jason. He debunked every one of his claims, uploaded the video as a last-ditch Hail Mary, and it might have worked. For some reason, the internet's honeymoon period with Jason seemed to have ended between then and now. Mostly due to the stupid WoW hardcore debacle, which is so dumb, I won't even bother explaining it. You're telling me that a guy can attack the very fundamental concept of video game preservation and barely get any shit for it? But if he dies in a World of Warcraft raid, all of a sudden that's what turns the internet against him? Either way, this was the boost that was needed to turn the tables on the initiative. In addition, well, you know how the internet is. People hammered Pirate. With everything he said about SKG being laid out, along with some of his questionable ties to existing live service titles, it was clear to many that he was a bad actor fighting against a movement that every single gamer should rally behind. And what followed Ross's video and all the various commentary responses and reactions to it is nothing short of an internet atom bomb. Response after response. People going after Pirate. Pirate spilling his spaghetti all over Twitter. People who used to defend him now calling him out. And the movement has garnered more support in the past 2 weeks than it did in the entire year it was online. And now it looks like the EU petition and the UK petition are both going through. We actually won't know for sure. The fear of there being fake signatures is absolutely real. That's why we're trying to get into some safe margins. But hey, Stop Killing Games did all it could, and it's in the law's hands now. It seems that this was the boost people needed into realizing just how bad things have gotten for the industry and for game ownership. And with Jason parroting the same talking points as multi-million-dollar publishers, he kind of ended up being the prime target for the internet's pent-up rage. The internet does not like having unfocused aggression. Some poor sap always ends up being the target. And this is something that neither I nor Ross condone. The memes were kind of funny. But why was one streamer so hell-bent on squashing the movement? Why did he seem to have a personal vendetta against Ross? When asked to clarify, Pirate has bounced from point to point, and his position seems so convoluted and contrived. I think most people are just confused by what he's even complaining about, which is a problem. Even the people who defended him don't really know what he's arguing about anymore, because he's done so much obfuscation. Yeah, obfuscation. Remember that word. Him and a lot of the detractors for the initiative don't seem to have a singular focus on what's wrong with Stop Killing Games. I've analyzed a bunch of what he's talked about too, which is difficult, by the way, because he is moving the goalposts so much. He basically has it strapped to his back, and he's running off the field. He's coming up with weird edge cases or making up fantastical hypotheticals. In fact, he juggles his points around so much, I myself was struggling to lay them all out until I made this video. So, I wrote them all down in a nice little list format that I thought we could go through together, point by point, just to track what exactly he has a problem with. And when you lay it out, it really is confusing. The criticisms brought to the table by Pirate Software, and as a result, all the people parodying him, are, as best as I can tell, developers and publishers aren't supposed to be expected to keep their games running forever. The initiative could allow companies to lose their intellectual property. The initiative should only apply to single-player games. The initiative will force people to rebalance multiplayer games to single-player games. The initiative will stop online-only live service games from existing. The initiative will stop MMOs from existing. And the wording of the EU initiative is too vague. For the sake of clarity and honesty, I will address these points, because I think it's good to clear up a lot of confusion for the handful of people who maybe still are on the fence, or who at the very least don't have a good understanding of what the initiative is. But I also want people to understand that I'm doing this in good faith against arguments that I genuinely believe were made in bad faith. Because there was one last little argument that Pirate had, which he has since shied away from since this controversy resurfaced. Some games shouldn't be saved. There are live service games that deserve to be sunsetted, and you shouldn't ever expect to play them if the developer doesn't want you to. Some games are better in their prime, and you have no right to save them.
A very strange demand from people in the gaming industry where live service games should live forever, whether in the hands of the developer or otherwise. And I can't get behind that shit. I think live service games getting sunsetted is fine. I've always thought that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I have no problems with the end of a video game.
Wow. This already gives away what he's fighting for. The ability for companies to kill games. Because screw you, games should die anyways. For the sake of educating you listeners, and for the sake of treating any of these other arguments with any semblance of seriousness, we'll save this point for last. I think it might be fun to go through point by point and break down exactly why they're wrong. As always, there's a time code down below. First point, and the point that's still really funny to see, even after it's been constantly debunked. The initiative wants to force developers and publishers to keep running their games indefinitely.
If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them.
Yeah, this point keeps getting clarified and disproven over and over. Yet, people still don't get the message. It's so common that I have to repeat it multiple times in the video just to make it stick. Stop Killing Games is only concerned for when that support ends. I said it already. I'll say it a third time. SKG, as an initiative, is already accepting of the fact that servers will be sunsetted. We know that developers will stop supporting their game. We're not asking for them to not do that. We accept that companies just can't run those servers forever. The only thing we're asking for is that once those servers are shut down, is that there better be an end-of-life plan so that people who bought that game can still play the game. So no, we are not asking for developers to run these games forever. Except for Pirate Software. We're going to force him to keep running games forever. Just him.
This is what we're doing to Pirate Software. We're going to put him in a server rack and we're going to force his brain to host the last remaining crew server so that 3 people in 2040 can play it. This is what we're doing to him.
The initiative could allow companies to lose their intellectual property. Ah, this is kind of a funny one. So, Pirate Software brought up this weird hypothetical. I'll get into that in just a sec. And now I'm starting to see people worried that the initiative is going to destroy IP law as we know it. I think it boils down to the fact that people don't understand. If you own a product and the company that's making that product stops supporting that product, you don't own the brand for that product. Epic has stopped making Unreal Tournament. However, I own copies of Unreal Tournament. I don't own the brand Unreal Tournament. Commerce law is pretty clear about this. Yet with video games, you get all these weird arguments muddying the water. Somehow, us asking for games to remain playable if a company doesn't want to support their game, this suddenly means that we're asking for companies to give up their IP. No, that's not how that works at all. But getting back to that certain someone. So, Jason came up with this kind of funny hypothetical, and I'm going to present it as best as I can, although I really don't understand exactly what he's getting at. So stay with me. On stream, he presented this fictitious doomsday scenario where if SKG successfully passed, people would DDoS all live service games. They would go after any online game they could, constantly DDoS attacking it, making it unplayable. According to him, if stopkillinggames went through, people would be incentivized to DDoS entire game studios with the goal of forcing these developers to end their business, or at the very least, to shut down servers for their games. Then, thanks to stopkillinggames, if these publishers had to give out their private server software, people outside of the developer studio would then be able to host and monetize servers themselves, thereby stealing the intellectual property from the company and essentially running those online games themselves and taking all the money from it.
At end of life, you now have to release those server binaries to keep the game in a functional playable state. At which point I take those, I create a private server, and I monetize it.
What? Okay, first, I like how Jason throws out this apocalyptic scenario where a group of users is so powerful that they can DDoS an entire game servers indefinitely without eventually being blocked and with the game eventually being restored. I need to remind you guys, in the worst DDoS attacks that have ever happened in internet history, services have always been brought back online because DDoS attacks aren't sustainable. They can only disrupt for a short amount of time before their bot network is isolated and blocked from whatever IP they're spamming. And sure, you can absolutely take down a service for quite a lot of time. Few days, maybe a couple weeks if it's that bad. But that's the thing. It's always temporary. The type of DDoS attack that Jason here is talking about is one that is so damaging and devastating, being maintained indefinitely, with it going on for so long that the company is literally forced out of business. This is a scenario that has never happened. This is all theoretical, which even then is charitable to say. I think most software engineers would call this fantasy, because that's really what it is. It's just fear-mongering. But it goes even further. His hypothetical has it so that legions of hackers can DDoS a game, force the developers to give away server code, then rehost the game on their end and monetize the game for themselves, like a fucking 80s Saturday morning cartoon villain. First off, you're not getting away with DDoSing. It's illegal in Europe. In the US, it's been a federal crime for decades. And publishers being obligated to allow their games to remain playable after support has ended isn't going to change the legality of DDoSing. Yeah, you think some group is going to be able to make money off a server they're hosting based off a game they DDoSed prior? You don't think in that scenario anyone's going to look into that just to see what exactly happened? And also, this scenario is just kind of funny to me because if companies are going to be able to give away their server code just so players can host their own private servers, this doesn't mean you're going to get entire armies of hackers ready to kill the developers. This isn't just obfuscation. I said it before, this is fear-mongering. Yeah, DDoSing happens. As long as the internet remains open globally, then we will still get bot attacks. But that's the thing. It's a threat that is constantly being fought against and is a priority of any company's web security team. This is something that IT security teams prepare for. They expect this. So no, there has never been a case where a game company lost their entire game because of a DDoS attack. Now, games that were disrupted temporarily, for sure, absolutely, but disrupted indefinitely until the end of time. Implausible, fantastical, completely made up, and unprecedented as of 2025. But then there's the second point I want to bring up. Okay, sure. Let's take this hypothetical at face value. Let's say, as crazy as this sounds, that a company is attacked endlessly by a massive DDoS attack. And the attack is so bad and is sustained for so long that the game is unplayable and the company is forced to end support for the game. And they have to shut it down. Which, once again, I need to clarify, this is not just an unlikely scenario, this is a borderline impossible scenario with zero precedence. A DDoS attack has never happened on this scale before. But again, let's take this hypothetical seriously. Let's say a company releases a game, the game gets DDoS attacked, it's so bad, game is shut down, developer loses money. Nothing proposed by Jason, nor by anybody who argues against Stop Killing Games, would prevent this from happening either. In fact, if publishers have no obligation to provide end-of-life support for its customers, and every player is well aware that they are reliant on those company-ran servers, which, hey, is already the case, then this won't prevent DDoSing. In fact, the only thing this fantasy hypothetical does is it actually strengthens the case for end-of-life support. Because if Pirate Software here is terrified of the scenario of massive DDoS attacks that are going to destroy games, then this should be a greater reason why games should be playable without needing to connect to a central server. Let players buy the game and host their own servers so that games remain playable, instead of forcing them through a choke point that can be targeted by attackers. This weird nightmare hypothetical is a strong case against central servers, not for it. A third and final point. When we're asking for tools to keep online games running, for games that we have already bought, we aren't asking for publishers to give up their rights to the IP. Just because players might be able to host their own servers, doesn't mean that players get to monetize and resell the game themselves. If a company stops supporting a game, and maybe they pull the plug on those servers, that doesn't automatically mean that they lose that IP. It just means that particular product is no longer being supported. SKG would just ask that buyers of that product still have a chance to keep using it, instead of it getting ripped out of their hands like it usually is. In addition, if there were people who were running their own private servers, trying to monetize the game, taking revenue from the publisher, then yeah, the publisher would be able to stop those people. In Thor's hypothetical scenario, this is something that could easily be stopped, with either a cease and desist or even potential legal action if it comes to that. Like I said in the beginning, SKG is not concerned with publishers and their IPs. If a company doesn't want to keep running their own servers for a game, and the only servers left are community servers, that doesn't affect the ownership of the IP in the slightest. Legally, the company still owns it, so they'd be well within their rights to ensure that players aren't reselling their games. So I just wanted to clarify all of that, because this was kind of a funny scenario, and I don't know, I really hope people aren't taking this seriously. The initiative should only apply to single player.
They need to be specific that they're talking about single-player games that do not need a server to support them.
This is an argument that Pirate brought up, and I've seen a couple times. Really, I think he just wishes the initiative would only go after single-player games, not multiplayer. Specifically, he wants us to go after single-player games that have online DRM, which applies to, I think, a very, very small subset of games. When it comes to games that are always online, there's usually at least some forced multiplayer or co-op mode that takes what might appear to be a single-player experience, but drag it into a multiplayer lobby. I'd say games like Destiny, The Crew, Anthem, The Division, these are games that can be played entirely solo, seem designed with solo play in mind, but force you into an online server where you bump into other people occasionally as you walk to your next mission. Hey, speaking of, guess which one of those games is getting shut down next year? Man, I love when companies like Ubisoft or EA inadvertently advertise this movement. But back to the topic at hand. This initiative is not about single player games, nor is it about multiplayer games. It's about all games. As Ross stated, there is no legal distinction between single player or multiplayer games, as they're both sold as goods to the consumer. So the initiative sees no reason to distinguish between the two. Commerce law doesn't. Both games can be bought by a customer. Both games should remain playable by that customer, even if the publisher doesn't want to keep supporting it. As pointed out earlier, plenty of multiplayer titles are still playable, despite their company dropping support. This applies to a lot of games. Unreal, Tribes, Quake, Pandemic's Battlefront, just to name a few. These are games that don't have official publisher support and are so old that those developers aren't even around anymore. But they're still playable, and they're playable in multiplayer. It's something that younger people either have forgotten or just don't know about. But back in the day, multiplayer games used to embrace private servers. Community servers were the norm for a while, and as such, games weren't shackled to online DRM. So that when these companies would eventually shut down, their games didn't, and they were still playable. In fact, I find that a lot of the people who are arguing against SKG are made up of people who just aren't aware that these things used to be the norm. Stop Killing Games is asking for things that used to be the standard. We're asking for stuff that games all used to have back in the day, but have since removed for online DRM. And now we have a generation of people who don't remember that era, and so they blindly argue that there's nothing that can be done. We're here to tell you that no, there is something that can be done, because it's already been done. Okay, so no, SKG is not concerned if a game is played solo, co-op, in a large multiplayer lobby, or on a giant, highly populated server. It's only concerned with you, the buyer, being able to play that game that you purchased with money, and making sure that even when the developer is long gone, you're still able to play that game. The initiative is going to force multiplayer games to rebalance to single player. Ooh, yeah, this is a fun argument. In the interest of honesty, I've really only heard this brought up by Jason himself, not by many other people. And even then, this argument, I feel, is made for obfuscation purposes. It really is. It's a clear example of Pirate Software yet again trying to convince people that they don't want to play their games after support ends. But I'll get into the point here. This argument is that Stop Killing Games is going to force all games to remain playable offline in single player. Not just that, but he's arguing that developers are going to be forced to rebalance their games so that they work in single player, meaning that all games are going to be turned into half-assed single-player ports with no multiplayer.
Transitioning an entire multiplayer server-side game into a single-player video game, which means rebalancing the entire experience around single-player, rebuilding everything in the entire game. How are you going to do that with Final Fantasy XIV? You're just going to make all the raids soloable? Imagine the day that World of Warcraft shuts down, and suddenly you have to make it a single-player game for every individual that ever bought the game. Because they would have to sunset live service games as a single-player experience. The idea that suddenly you need to make every single live service game playable single-player offline? No, dude.
Rebalancing a multiplayer game to single-player is not what anyone is asking for. I touched on this in a previous point, but to reiterate, nowhere are we asking for games to be playable offline in a single-player mode. In fact, we are well aware that games, a lot of MMOs, can't be played offline and require a connection to a server to function. Sometimes code is built within the server itself. There's scripting going on there that isn't on the client side. For those types of games, they'll need a different end-of-life plan than a regular offline single-player game. You'll notice how in the initiative, there aren't specific requirements for what we constitute as an end-of-life plan either. There isn't a specific point that says, we demand all games work offline in single player. You may think there's a lot of wiggle room there, and yeah, that's there by design. Sometimes playable means a game can work if players are able to set up their own private servers. Sure, it doesn't work offline, but that constitutes as playable. You can reasonably run the game after support has ended. As I said earlier, lobby-based multiplayer games rely off of community servers. But yeah, we're not asking for multiplayer games to be tacked on to single-player offline modes. Nowhere is that stated, nor implied. I like this argument. Stop Killing Games is going to prevent online-only live service games from existing. That's the old reliable argument. People think that SKG is going to kill live service games. There's a double argument too, because half the people peddling it seem to think it's what the initiative is directly about, and the other half seem to know that the initiative isn't about this, but think it will lead to live service games getting banned anyways. And to top it off, I think a lot of people who believe this argument are also the ones supporting it. But let me clarify. To the people who think Stop Killing Games is directly trying to destroy live service games, it's not about that. It never was. It's about preserving all games, live service games included, just making sure those games remain playable no matter what happens to the publisher or the developer. Either if the servers shut down, if the companies close, we want those games to remain playable. Now, to the other people who maybe understand that this isn't part of the initiative, but think that live service games are going to be killed anyways because that's what it's going to lead to, no, it won't. Not in the slightest. Live service games aren't going anywhere. All it means is that they're going to have proper end-of-life support. The only way companies would stop making live service games is if overnight they became afraid of making a boatload of money. Yeah, we understand. The reason live service games are as popular as they are is because they rake in so much fucking money. And as I also said earlier, the costs to implementing these end-of-life plans is so negligible that a lot of publishers can probably do the math in their heads. So yeah, Stop Killing Games is not going to kill live service games. It was never the goal. However, the waters get increasingly muddied because a lot of supporters of the initiative aren't the biggest fans of live service games either. As you might guess, a lot of the games that are killed are the ones that are live service games. Games that are forced to be always online or forced to connect to an online DRM. These are the games being killed. What's funny here is Jason tries to use this as a scare tactic, that SKG is going to kill all live service games. The problem with that, Jason, is there are a lot of people who see that as a good thing. Hilariously, Pirate Software claiming that this initiative will kill live service games might actually be giving more support to SKG than it is taking away from it. Oh no, Mr. Pirate Software. You're telling me if I sign this initiative, then all live service games are going to be stopped? Great. And I hate to say it, but I get where all these people are coming from. It has been an exhausting decade, constantly losing our games, shutdown after shutdown, and getting bombarded with awful business practices through live service games. This fear-mongering argument just ends up selling the initiative more than it really should. Because that's the thing. The initiative is not about preventing live service games. Yeah, I'm sorry to burst your bubbles here. Stop Killing Games is not about preventing live service games from ever existing. Just asking for an end-of-life plan. That's all it is. I'm going to be repeating it throughout the entire video. That's all SKG is. Give us an end-of-life plan. Let us play our games even when you're done supporting them. But if that game is being supported, developers can do all they want with it. Yeah, make it always online. Make it live service. Anything. It's their game. Stop Killing Games is just only concerned with once publishers shut down that game and ensuring that people can still play it. And yeah, you can argue that this will make it more difficult in making live service games. Hypothetically, if developers are forced to add compartmentalization so that a game can easily be severed from a central server if it comes to that, yeah, you could say that's going to take more time and money. But first off, this is not a retroactive initiative. It's only for games in the future, for games being developed in the years and decades to come. And guess what? If you go into a software project and you know that in some capacity this has to be functional, either offline or disconnected from your own central servers, you'd be shocked to learn how easy that is to implement. All of a sudden, developers are a little smarter when making their games, and they don't force their games to connect to an online server that is eventually going to be shut down. I really urge people to talk to real developers, actual software engineers who know what they're talking about, because a lot of them would agree these proposals are laughably easy. The extra time for implementing these types of features, either offline modes, private server software, hell, just giving away documentation and the server code itself. Of the developers that have chimed in, the consensus seems to be these implementations are quick, cheap, and almost certainly wouldn't take any time at all. Most live service games already have these features to begin with, just locked behind dev modes. Anyone who's worked in software on an online product, this is like a no-brainer to us. Yeah, online software can easily work if disconnected from a central server. That's how development works. Compartmentalization usually already exists. Anyway, I'm getting off into the weeds on that. We can go into circular arguments about whether or not this would take a lot of time and effort to implement, some of these end-of-life features. But do you know what else takes a little bit of time to get installed? Airbags. Or seatbelts. Yeah, install an airbag or a seatbelt on your car. Such an unreasonable request from consumers. Don't they understand how much time and money it takes to implement these services? And if companies are forced to include these things, they might not make cars at all. Do you see how stupid this sounds now? Or hey, video game companies. Maybe you shouldn't be forced to implement these end-of-life plans, just because they take a little bit of time and work. So you know what we're going to do? Oh sure, Ubisoft, you can take away this product that I've already purchased, but you're going to have to pay me back. Yeah, let's start implementing real commerce law into this. Want to shut down that game? Just give everybody who bought it their money back. This has precedence, by the way. Plenty of companies have already done this. Seems like a pretty reasonable ask for me, especially if developers don't want to waste any time editing the game, making it playable offline or playable with private servers. Which would you rather have, publisher? Lose all your hundreds of millions of dollars or spend less than a day implementing these features? I'm going to say that of these two choices, Stop Killing Games is unequivocally reasonable. So I'll leave it at that. However, I do understand that when it comes to online games, match-based multiplayer games, usually games that only have at most a couple dozen players, these are pretty easy to implement with private servers. However, MMOs are much more complex. This comes with its own set of arguments, because a lot of the pushback against Stop Killing Games seems to revolve around MMOs. Stop Killing Games will stop MMOs from existing.
If that passes, enjoy never playing an MMO again for the rest of your life.
This kind of ties in with the previous point that Stop Killing Games is going to stop online live service games from existing, because let's be real, that's pretty much what MMOs are. In addition, people seem to think that MMOs are just impossible to work without company-run servers. Again, I think we're entering an era where the Zoomers don't know how netcode works. The idea of running your own server is alien to them. And at first, yeah, I do get it. MMOs rely on big servers. And so to a lot of people, a server that can run hundreds of players is something that maybe only the publisher can manage. Those sound expensive, sound like they require a lot of maintenance. So a lot of people think that MMOs may just disappear. Or at the very least, maybe they think MMOs should just be exempt from Stop Killing Games. In addition, a lot of people seem pretty accepting of the fact that MMOs get shut down. It's really become this tragic Stockholm syndrome where people seem accepting of the fact that, yeah, that MMO that you really love to play and you dumped hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours into it, that MMO is being destroyed and there's nothing you can do about it. I feel like I'm going crazy seeing a lot of this because I feel like everyone should be up in arms about their favorite MMO being shut down. Yet, people don't really see that as a big problem. A lot of people see MMOs as just a lost cause, which is sad to me. An expansive virtual world full of countless stories and memories. Yep, we're all just fine with those games being destroyed. So yeah, people seem very confused on MMOs. They seem to think that they're too complicated to run without publisher support. Players running MMOs seems to be a pipe dream. And so, MMOs in general just will naturally die. There's no stopping it, there's no preventing it, there's nothing we can do to save it. How can you possibly hope to preserve MMOs? Older MMOs die. That's just the way of life. How can you possibly preserve an MMO? Sorry. Sorry, guys. I was just getting a little distracted. Yeah, I'm trying this new MMO. It's called Meridian 59. It's an MMO from 1996. Yeah, this game is older than I am. Yep, look at me playing it right now. I'm still connected to a server too. Look, I gotta connect online just to play. How am I possibly playing Meridian 59 in the year 2025? Meridian 59 was already shut down. Almost 15 years ago, in fact. So then the game is unplayable online, right? As I said, the original server was shut down. And as dictated by gamers, MMOs can't be played without direct publisher support. No again. The game was shut down in 2010. However, the original developers managed to wrangle their IP back. And what did they do? They immediately gave out their server software as freeware. In fact, the whole game is given away as freeware. They made it open source. Without lifting a finger, fans of the game took that source code and ran with it, recreating their own servers and reigniting interest in the game. Because of that, Meridian 59 is alive and well. Now, full disclosure, I haven't played Meridians 1 through 58, but Meridian 59 is a pretty good accomplishment. You guys are watching an MMO that is probably older than most of you. And this exists entirely because of one of these end-of-life plans. Yeah, of those plans that we've mentioned, simply giving away server code, Meridian 59 is probably going to last forever. So long as players are interested in this game, that source code is going to be available to everybody. For people who are dedicated enough, they will keep this game running, even long after the original company has abandoned it. Hell, the original company I don't even think exists anymore. With enough time and effort, fans of an MMO can and will set up their own servers. The nitty-gritty of server software and whether or not companies can distribute it to players is something that Ross has covered better in his videos, both recently and in the past, which I'll link down below. Because yeah, some server software can have third-party code that maybe can't be distributed. We understand that. However, people need to understand, server software is not this monolithic black box that is impenetrable to the average mortal. It's also a moot point to me because I've seen this happen with my own eyes. MMOs getting resurrected by fans. This has happened many, many times. And yes, a guy running a server off of his computer is not going to have the same capacity as a Blizzard server. But it's better than the other option. You know what that option is? It's nothing.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
So detractors, I ask you, would you rather have something or nothing?
Stupid! You're so stupid!
I'd rather have a fighting chance than no chance at all, but that's just me. Because look at this. Meridian 59 is one of the oldest MMOs in history. In fact, it's the oldest 3D MMO. Yeah, it has EverQuest and Asheron's Call beat by a few years. In fact, it has Ultima Online beat by a single year. This is an incredibly old game, made by a tiny team of developers, I believe around 20 employees, give or take. And in the previous point, we were talking about how detractors of Stop Killing Games keep bringing up how much time and effort it will take to implement some of these end-of-life plans. They'll say that it's too impractical and they're too costly. That making an MMO functional once publishers end support, that's just going to take too much time and effort. It's impossible. So take Meridian 59. They were able to do it. They were able to release their game's source code and their server code. And they did it with a team of only 200 programmers. Yeah, 200 programmers were able to... Wait. Oh, sorry. I wrote that wrong. Two. I meant 2 programmers. 2 of the original developers, in fact. It took 2 guys. And once they released the source code, that's all it took. The entire game was revived, and now it's probably going to last much longer than any of these other MMOs that are getting shut down as we speak. I recognize MMOs nowadays are a bit more complex than they were in the 90s. Server code might be a little more complex than it was in the 90s. However, I'm also going to go out on a limb and say that a studio made up of only 20 people probably had less resources than a studio of thousands. If a studio of 20 is able to future-proof their game, and decades later, 2 guys are able to re-release the source code and ensure their game is playable till the end of time, then I think a giant multi-billion conglomerate doesn't have any excuses. For Stop Killing Games, the movement believes that MMOs deserve to be preserved like everything else, and there's a lot of precedence towards MMOs being playable thanks to fan support. Hey, take a look at all of these MMOs. MMOs that were shut down, but are now still playable thanks to fan servers. So remember this. The next time someone tells you that MMOs are unsalvageable and that they will die and there's no preventing that, think back to Meridian 59. The last quote-unquote real point. The initiative is too vague. The EU petition is too vague and it needs to be super specific.
Vague, too vague, very vague, damn vague. It's vague, it's vague, that is vague. Too vague, vaguely written, vague, incredibly vague, vaguely worded, vague, vague, vague. This is vague.
Okay, guys, it's a petition. It's not a law. We're not writing a law here. We're not lawmakers. It even has a character limit. It's meant to begin a discussion with EU lawmakers on determining what should be done for these games and what should be done for the case of game ownership. Ross isn't the one who's supposed to write the law here. It's the people who are going to read this petition. This initiative is really there just to get the idea off the ground and to at least hopefully get some sort of legal precedence here. This has been explained maybe 100 times by now, but I'll keep saying this. This petition is meant to be a bridge between consumers, lawmakers, and yes, game publishers too, because there is supposed to be a lot of wiggle room in these words. The reason we don't go into the nitty-gritty is because we're not supposed to. The petition is not supposed to tackle edge cases right away. It's supposed to state the case, what consumers want, and it's up to the EU to figure out what to do there. Stop Killing Games wants people to be able to play their games no matter what. Whenever someone says the petition is too vague, that's just a giveaway that they haven't really listened to any of the arguments, and if anything, they're only parroting what people online are saying. And what's even more frustrating is that if we do go down the list, if the petition did have specifics listing out each and every conceivable way that we want games to be preserved, it still wouldn't be good enough. You'd have people arguing that forcing games to be offline, or forcing games to give up their server software, or forcing games to go open source isn't applicable to all games. Yeah, we know. That's why we don't list them all. That's why it intentionally gives wiggle room. Again, you just can't win with some people. The petition is going to be given to EU lawmakers, and they're going to see how one side is acting reasonable and in good faith, while the other is constantly advocating for products that you've purchased to be destroyed. Optics is huge here, and if we start making super arbitrary judgment calls, that's a good way to get the entire initiative thrown out. That's why the initiative is written the way it is. And on to the final point. As I mentioned earlier, Pirate Software had one last reason why he disagreed with Stop Killing Games. Something that way too many people seem to gloss over after the fact. Games deserve destruction. At least your live service games do. If your game is always online, then there's no reason for you to even care about preserving your game, which is the entire point of this initiative. Every argument before this point seemed like at least somewhat of a misrepresentation of the issue that could be at least clarified. Like, yeah, people who believed any of these other points, I totally understand. Maybe they just are misreading what the initiative is for. These are the type of people that we want to have genuine discussions with. Hey, Ross tried to have a genuine discussion with Pirate. In the case of Pirate Software, however, he kept dodging all of the questions. He kept avoiding Ross, going for ad hominem attacks, being really weirdly hostile for no apparent reason. It's funny because anyone who's interacted with Ross knows that, yeah, this guy is not here to fight, which is made all the more funny by just how genuine and wholesome Ross seems to be. So why would Pirate be so hostile to him? Well, this point right here solidifies what he's really about. To him and to many other people, some games don't deserve to be played after support ends, and they fully believe that there should be no recourse at all to continue playing that game. To them, some games are only worth playing when they're popular, when they're in their prime, at the height of their player counts. Outside of that, once the popularity has died down, once the hype is gone, there's no reason for you to even keep playing the game. At least that's how I interpret it.
So the next one is that this is about games preservation, and that it needs to happen to preserve these types of games for future generations and for everyone to always have forever. Social games require a number of players to be in the match at the same time so that you can have an experience that is only able to be obtained through lots of players interacting, right? It's a multiplayer game. You need a bunch of people. So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me. You want to put them up on a private server and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense.
So just understand, all of these other points here, which I did treat seriously, all of these points were completely disingenuous because they're just trying to cover up what people against Stop Killing Games really believe, which is that games deserve to die. All of these arguments that you've seen online from people like Pirate and a few others who are constantly trying to disparage the movement, saying that it's too vague, saying that developers will be afraid of making online games, or saying that games are going to get DDoS attacked just to steal IPs from those developers. These aren't real points. It's all grade A obfuscation, at least from Pirate Software. He's not misinformed. He's not clueless. He's a certified concern troll. To finish it off with Pirate Software, I don't think Jason ever intended on having a civil discussion with Ross. Hypothetically, if Ross had done all of the arbitrary things that Pirate wanted, none of it would have been good enough. At the end of the day, Jason's just fundamentally against this initiative at its core. The core being stop killing games. What I think we're looking at here is an individual who lied about the initiative. It's because he hated what it represented, preserving games and preventing them from being shut down. So he had to come up with a bunch of weird reasons, just to make himself sound somewhat justified. He hoped it would be the last word in it. Like his final word was going to be the end of Stop Killing Games, and he'd be able to just drop the mic. What he didn't expect was for someone like Ross, a guy who's just normal, who's open to discussion. I really don't think they were expecting just how dedicated the SKG movement was. And unfortunately for them, they just keep doubling down. I think what we're seeing right now is just a person who's doing everything they can to save face, even if that means alienating the entire internet against them, because the alternative is to admit that you were either wrong or lying. And poor Ross just got sucked into the middle of all of it, just because he wanted to save games. So this is where we get to the real point of Stop Killing Games. Games deserve to live. And that's it. The idea that you don't deserve to experience a game after its heyday is one that I disagree with. I fundamentally disagree with this at my very core. Anyone who believes this, who believes that a game, once it's not popular anymore, you don't even deserve to play it. No one deserves to play it. It deserves to just fade away and wither and die. I don't think I could ever see eye to eye with this person. I don't think I could have a conversation with them on, I don't know, anything. I have no idea what we'd even have in common when it comes to things like art or maybe even philosophy, although that's a little too deep for this channel. Having something is better than nothing. Would you rather play an MMO in its prime with a giant bustling community instead of an MMO that's been going on for many years and has a very small and spotty player base? Sure, an argument could be made that one is more preferable than the other. But do you know what I'd also rather do? I'd rather be able to play it at all. That MMO that may only have a small community left, I'd rather play that than no game at all. I will take a game that's playable, even if it's a shadow of its former self. Your choices are something versus nothing. I can't even really wrap my head around the deeply uninteresting type of person who would rather a game die than be in a playable state, just because it's slightly less popular than when it launched. I also have an obligatory question for these people, the type of people who attack game preservation, the type of people like this who think that a game doesn't deserve to live beyond its prime.
So why would you want to preserve a game in that state? That doesn't make any sense to me. You want to put them up on a private server and then play it with a couple of people. You're not bringing it back at its height. You're not taking a snapshot of what the game actually is. You're making it limp on in a way that doesn't make any sense.
Who is the one to determine when a game isn't worth playing anymore? You? Are you the determining factor on whether or not I should play my game? Do you decide if a game should be shut down? What metrics are you using? How many players is too few for a game to be worth keeping alive? Oh no, guys, this MMO went from 1 million concurrent players to only 900,000. It's a dead game. Time to pull the plug. My answer to this question on what determines whether or not a game is worth playing is fuck you. How about I figure that out myself? Who's to say I won't like revisiting a game from decades ago? Who are you to tell me whether or not I should be having fun in old games? Just because the community has shrunk in size. Maybe I'm an introvert, and I like games with low player counts. Who's to say? There's only one person who should determine if I should be able to play a game that I've purchased, and that's fucking me, no one else. The people who fight against this represent a type of person who is deeply disturbing. The type of person who doesn't touch anything that isn't super popular right now. You get that impression with these people. Like they really only care if a game is at the top of the Steam charts before they even try it, which is antithetical to the movement itself. Yeah, I get how someone who wants to play modern live service games and nothing older than a year or two might get scared at the notion of being able to play a game before they were born. I feel that's the audience that people like Pirate Software here pander to when they talk about how awful it is to try and play a game this long after release. I laugh at the word normie, but there absolutely is a subsect of gamer who fits this description, more than you can imagine. A few years ago, Sony took legal action against Microsoft's acquisition of Activision, and a bunch of the court documents were leaked, including those belonging to Sony. Some of the information that came out of this was that Sony had found there are millions of players who will play one title on PlayStation and nothing else. There are a million people out there who will just play FIFA, or a million people out there who only own the most recent Call of Duty and nothing else. I think that we sometimes forget that these people exist out there, that there are people who don't have a care for anything older than a couple of years. I'm kind of joking, but these people are real, and I see them crop up all the time around the Stop Killing Games initiative. It's important to understand that before you find yourself pulling out your hair, trying to argue with somebody about why they should care about their games, you need to know sometimes there are people who can't comprehend anything beyond the last 6 months. Okay, we're getting out into the weeds here, so I'm going to bring this video back on track. My ultimate take has always been, games are art. And I mean all games. Not just Sony movie games, not just those artsy 1-hour indie games that journalists seem to love. Not to say those aren't art either, but I think all games, all other games are art. Action games, role-playing games, MMOs, multiplayer shooters. There is so much talent and design that goes into each and every one of these titles. The digital environments that make up an arena shooter are beautiful. The aesthetic and mood that a designer puts into his map is art. I think the music, writing, and voice acting given to random side quest characters in some massive MMORPG is art. I think the fun you have in a multiplayer game, shooting your buddies, is art. Games are art. You can disagree with me, sure, but at that point, I don't expect you to understand why preserving games matters. If you look at one of the hundreds, maybe thousands of games that will shut down or have already been shut down, and you can't find a single thing about them that is at least worth preserving, then I'm sorry, but you kind of have no place in this conversation. Games are beautiful. These digital worlds are worth preserving. Many of my favorite games were titles that I was either too young to enjoy in their prime, or just straight up were older than I am. Doom and Quake are older than me. Half-Life is older than me. My journey in discovering and playing older games has genuinely shifted my entire understanding of what games can be as a medium. It's a perspective I have just because I was able to revisit these old games. Had I never been able to play them, I might have remained stuck in my current year flavor of the month slop. I might have just simply grown out of games entirely were it not for some of these titles. Games deserve to be preserved. I want these games to survive, not just so I can play them, but so people in the future can play them too. So what can be done? Well, if you're in the EU or the UK, you can sign these petitions to hopefully get this in front of lawmakers. Both petitions have met their required signatures, 100,000 in the UK and 1 million in the EU. However, we want people to keep signing it. Get that 1 million to 1.1 million, or 1.2, or 1.5, hell, get us to 2 million. Fake signatures is a huge concern, so we want plenty of wiggle room just to ensure that no funny business will happen. Leave it to gamers to cram in all of their work right before the deadline. And hey, everyone's celebrating that we got the assignment done right before it's due. But I'm going to be the stern dad here and tell you to check your work because you have some time left. Clear even bigger thresholds to ensure that this gets looked at. Outside of these petitions, I would say just keep the discussion alive. Even as the internet rallies around SKG, games are still being killed. Yeah, look at this one. Just this year, multiple titles have already been shut down or are being planned to get shut down. Don't let people treat this as a short-lived fad. This is still an uphill battle, and the hard part hopefully seems to be out of the way. But even still, don't let up. In addition, keep things civil. Protect the civility. You could almost say it's civil protection. But seriously, be polite and informative. Don't be snarky. Don't go for ad hominem attacks. It's what the concerned trolls want. They want to see people freak out at them so they have an excuse to invalidate the entire movement just because of a couple bad apples. The most enraging thing to these people is that the face of the movement, Ross, is just a courteous, respectful dude who holds little ill will to anybody. He tries to inform people, he doesn't pick fights, and if it's clear the other person isn't there to listen, he moves on. Follow his example. There's going to be a ton of videos by Ross down in the description just to get a lot of you guys up to speed in case you haven't been following this extensive saga of him trying to stop killing games. I'll link some of his videos about the movement directly, some of his update videos, as well as some of his older Game Dungeon videos, which seem to be the genesis of this entire movement. They were definitely informative to me, and I hope they are to you too. Anyway, that's it from me. I love Ross and all he does. After this is all over, I hope he can find some time to relax. He's earned it. No matter what happens, I am proud of the work this movement was able to achieve. And if nothing else, at least we can say we tried. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.